They said every great love story begins with a spark, but for Ava Coleman, it began with silence. The kind of silence that fills a room like fog, soft, invisible, and suffocating. For 5 years, Ava had been the woman no one saw. Not because she wasn't beautiful. She was striking, with warm brown skin that caught the light like polished mahogany, and eyes that carried the quiet ache of someone who'd once believed in forever. No, Ava was unseen, because the man she married preferred it that way. Ethan Parker, Atlanta's golden boy, tech developer, and self-made millionaire, never mentioned her name at galas, fundraisers, or board meetings. To his world, he was single, sophisticated, perfectly polished. And Ava? She was a secret folded neatly between his designer suits and double life. If you've ever loved someone so deeply that you started to disappear just to keep them, stay with me. This story will make you remember what it costs to trade your worth for someone else's comfort. And while you're here, take a breath, hit that follow button, and tell me in the comments. Have you ever loved someone who made you feel invisible? Ava woke before dawn that morning, the Atlanta skyline glowing pale gold beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse. She moved like a ghost through the marble kitchen, brewing coffee for a husband who never noticed when she'd changed her hair, her perfume, her dreams. Ethan's world was always louder. Meetings, phone calls, laughter that wasn't for her. "Morning," he muttered, scrolling through messages, his expensive watch glinting under the kitchen lights. "Morning," she whispered back. He didn't look up. That was their language now. Unfinished sentences, half smiles, and the quiet hum of a marriage that looked perfect from the outside. On the refrigerator hung a framed photo from their wedding day. Ava in ivory silk, radiant, believing. Ethan, handsome and sure, whispering promises that had long since dissolved into ambition. She touched the frame lightly, tracing the edges as if to remind herself it had been real once. When he left for work, the door closed with its familiar echo, sharp, final. Ava stood still until the silence became unbearable, then turned toward the window where the city pulsed below, full of lives that didn't include her. 5 years of this. 5 years of being the woman behind the curtain while Ethan played the part of the charming bachelor. His business events filled magazines. His face appeared on top 40 under 40 lists. Yet no one ever asked about the wife who waited at home in muted dresses and practiced smiles. Sometimes she wondered if she'd imagined their marriage. Other times she knew she hadn't, but wished she had. Ava had once dreamed of being an artist. Color was her language. Creation, her prayer. But when Ethan proposed, he'd promised a life of ease. "You'll never have to worry about chasing galleries or selling paintings. I'll take care of you." It had sounded like love then. Now it felt like a cage lined with silk. That afternoon, her phone buzzed. A message from Lila Torres, her college roommate, and the only person who still called her just to ask how she was, not who she was with. "Lila, haven't seen you in months. There's an art fair in the old Fourth Ward this weekend. Come. Breathe." Ava stared at the text for a long moment. Breathe. What a strange word when you've been holding your breath for years. She typed back, "Maybe." It was the closest thing to a yes she'd said to herself in a long time. Later, when Ethan returned home, the air changed again. He kissed her cheek absently, still on the phone. She caught a trace of unfamiliar perfume, sharp, floral, nothing like hers. The sound of his laughter on the call sliced through her chest. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. Instead, she walked into the bedroom, sat before the mirror, and really looked at herself. The woman staring back seemed older, smaller, dulled. Her curls were straight and flat, her dress beige, her shoulders slightly bent, as if she'd learned to make herself fit inside Ethan's world by shrinking. She whispered, almost to her reflection, "When did I stop being me?" Downstairs, Ethan called out, "Babe, next week's gala, dress formal, but nothing too bright, okay?" He didn't see her wince, didn't see her fingers tighten around the vanity edge, didn't see how that one sentence, a simple request, was a reminder of all the ways he dimmed her. That night, while he slept beside her, phone face down, Ava stared at the ceiling and thought of Lila's message again. She imagined walking through that art fair, colors exploding against brick walls, strangers laughing freely. And for the first time in years, she wondered what it would feel like to exist without permission. Outside, thunder rolled softly over the Atlanta skyline. Inside, something small but powerful flickered awake in her chest. A question, a defiance, a spark. She didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning. The night the hidden wife began to see herself again. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning. Thick, ivory paper, embossed with gold lettering. The Atlanta Visionary Awards Gala. Ava read it twice, her pulse quickening not with excitement but disbelief. Ethan never brought her to events like this. For years she'd been the shadow wife, unseen, unspoken, perfectly erased. Yet that evening, he strolled into the kitchen with his tie loosened and a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You'll come with me Saturday," he said, as if announcing a business plan. "My assistant can't make it. You'll look perfect in that silver dress I bought you last year." Ava's throat tightened. "The one you never wanted me to wear in public," she thought. But she said only, "All right." And just like that, she was drafted into his performance. The night arrived wrapped in velvet and city lights. Atlanta shimmered as though the whole skyline had been dipped in champagne. Ethan's Tesla hummed up the circular driveway of the Grand Monarch Hotel, headlights gliding over gowns and tuxedos. Ava sat still beside him, hands clasped in her lap, heart pounding in quiet rebellion. She had almost backed out. But something, curiosity, maybe courage, made her stay. If she was to be seen, even for one night, she would make it count. Her silver dress clung like moonlight. Her natural curls framed her face in soft defiance. And for the first time in years, she refused to hide behind beige. When Ethan glanced at her, a flicker of irritation crossed his face. "It's a little bold, don't you think?" Ava smiled faintly. "Maybe it's time I was." He didn't respond. The valet opened her door, and the sound of cameras, laughter, and crystal chandeliers spilled into the night. Inside, the ballroom pulsed with money and ambition. Laughter sharp as glass, champagne bubbling like secrets. Everywhere she looked, faces turned toward Ethan. Firm handshakes, practiced smiles, compliments that smelled of power. He introduced her mechanically. "This is my wife, Ava." The words fell from his mouth like an afterthought. People nodded politely, their eyes sliding over her, confused, perhaps, by how his caramel-skinned wife fit into his spotless brand. No one asked what she did, what she loved, who she was. And yet, she felt everything. The weight of every glance, the chill of every dismissal, the invisible walls she'd been living behind, now illuminated by 100 crystal lights. When Ethan walked off to greet investors, Ava stood alone near the edge of the ballroom, a single island in a sea of sequins. The string quartet swelled. A woman in a red gown laughed too loudly. And for the first time in years, Ava wasn't just sad. She was angry. Her reflection in the mirrored wall caught her eye. At first, she didn't recognize herself. Not the woman she used to be. Paint-splattered hands, hair wild with freedom, a laugh that filled every room. This reflection was flawless and hollow. A mannequin wearing someone else's perfection. Something inside her shifted. Across the room, she saw Ethan, head tilted, whispering something to his vice president's wife. His hand rested on the small of the woman's back with a familiarity that made Ava's stomach twist. She looked away before the pain could drown her. But then, she saw color. At the far end of the ballroom, an art installation shimmered. A temporary exhibit of local artists, curated for the gala's charity auction. A canvas caught her eye. A burst of crimson and gold, bold and alive. The plaque beneath it read, "Reclamation." Ava moved closer. The artist's note said, "A woman's silence can be her survival until she learns that her voice is the masterpiece." Her breath caught. It was as if someone had cracked open her chest and painted her pain onto that canvas. When Ethan returned, his hand lightly touched her arm. "Smile more," he murmured. "You look tense." She turned to him, her voice steady. "Maybe that's because I finally feel something real." He blinked, unsure if he'd heard her right, but she was already walking away, toward the painting, toward the light. People noticed her now. The confident stride, the quiet grace that didn't ask for permission. Conversations faltered. Someone whispered her name. The silver dress shimmered like defiance. And when she stopped before the crimson canvas again, she didn't see pain anymore. She saw possibility. Later that night, As the gala reached its crescendo, Ethan approached with forced charm. "You were the talk of the evening," he said, a note of irritation beneath his smile. "Then I suppose they finally saw me," Ava replied. He stared at her, searching for the compliant wife he used to command. But she was gone, replaced by a woman who had tasted visibility and found it electric. On the ride home, silence filled the car again. But this time it wasn't the kind that suffocates. It was the kind that breathes before a storm. Ava gazed out the window as the city lights streaked past like brushstrokes across glass. Somewhere inside, she felt the first heartbeat of freedom. She didn't know yet what she would do, or how she would begin again. But she knew one thing for certain. She would never disappear quietly again. The woman who had once been hidden was stepping into the light. And this time, she wouldn't let anyone dim it. Morning sunlight spilled across the marble floors, sliding in soft ribbons through the sheer white curtains. To anyone looking from the outside, the Parkers' penthouse still looked perfect. An empire of glass and quiet wealth, perched above the hum of Atlanta's skyline. But inside, the silence was sharper than ever. Ava sat at the breakfast table, her silver coffee spoon resting untouched. The remnants of last night's gala still echoed in her mind. The stares, the whispers, the flash of crimson and gold on that painting titled Reclamation. She hadn't slept. Something inside her had cracked, and she could feel the air slipping through. Ethan entered the kitchen in his usual rush of cologne and confidence. "Morning," he said, eyes fixed on his phone. He didn't notice the untouched coffee, or that she was still wearing her robe at nearly 10. "Did you sleep?" she asked softly. He glanced up, surprised she'd spoken first. "Barely. Too many messages from investors. That speech I gave about urban revitalization. It's going viral." He smiled, pleased with himself. Ava nodded. "You were good at pretending." "What?" "Nothing," she said. But it wasn't nothing. He dropped his phone, finally studying her. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ava looked at him steadily, her voice quiet but deliberate. "You put on a show last night, Ethan. Like always. You don't want a wife, you want a prop. Someone who makes you look more human." He laughed, sharp and humorless. "You're being dramatic again." That word, again, cut deeper than he knew. He said it the same way he said relax or calm down, words that erased her piece by piece. She looked down at her wedding ring, twisting it slowly. "Do you ever wonder what people would think if they knew how lonely it is up here?" Ethan leaned back, smirking. "Lonely? Ava, most women would kill to live this life. You have everything you could ever want. Everything but a husband," she said. The silence that followed was so still it could have broken glass. Later that afternoon, Ava walked through the penthouse rooms, each one a shrine to Ethan's success. The walls were lined with framed awards, abstract art chosen by decorators, photographs of him shaking hands with governors and CEOs. There wasn't a single trace of her. No photos of their wedding, no paintings from the days when she still dared to create, no sign that she'd ever belonged here at all. The realization made her chest ache. She'd traded color for comfort, art for approval, and somehow, in the process, she'd become invisible, even to herself. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Lila. "You looked stunning last night, but you also looked trapped. Want to talk?" Ava stared at the screen. The truth in that message burned. That evening, Ethan came home later than usual. His tie was loose, his voice too smooth. "Rough day," he said, kissing her cheek absently. The scent of unfamiliar perfume clung to him, something floral and new. "Rough day or late night?" she asked, her tone deceptively calm. He froze just for a second, before recovering. "Why would you say that?" "Because you smell like someone else." His jaw tightened. "You're imagining things again." "Am I?" Ava's voice broke slightly. Not from weakness, but from the strain of holding too much in for too long. "You think I don't notice the way you flinch when I touch you? The secret calls you take in the study? The sudden meetings that never make it to your calendar?" He looked away. "You're making a scene. There's no one here to see it," she said bitterly. He moved to the bar, poured himself a drink, the ice clinking like punctuation marks in a confession he'd never give. "You always do this, Ava. Turn small things into drama. You've got too much time on your hands. Maybe that's the problem." She stared at him. "The problem isn't time, Ethan. The problem is that you made me disappear." Her voice wavered, but she didn't stop. I used to paint. I used to laugh. I used to have friends who saw me. And then you built this cage around me and called it love. He sighed, exasperated. God, listen to yourself. You sound ungrateful. Ungrateful. That word hit her like a slap. It was how he justified everything. The lies, the distance, the slow erasure of her identity. She turned toward the window, where the city lights flickered far below. Do you even remember the last time we talked about something real? Not money, not image, just us. Ethan didn't answer. He downed the rest of his drink instead. That night, while he snored softly beside her, Ava lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Every word, every dismissal, replayed in her mind until her chest ached with quiet rage. Her thoughts drifted to the painting from the gala, the explosion of red and gold, the words, "A woman's silence can be her survival," until she learns her voice is the masterpiece. She whispered it to herself like a prayer. Then, slowly, she swung her legs off the bed, walked barefoot to her old sketchbook tucked behind a closet shelf, and opened it. Dust puffed into the air. The first page was dated 5 years ago, a sketch of her own face, smiling, alive. She ran her fingers over it, eyes stinging. Then she picked up a pencil. At first, her hand trembled, but soon lines began to flow. Faint at first, then fierce. A woman standing at a window, her reflection splitting into light and shadow. The drawing was raw, imperfect, but real. Ava felt her heartbeat steady for the first time in years. When dawn crept in, Ethan stirred. "You're up early," he mumbled. "I couldn't sleep," she said, her voice steady now. He rolled over. "You should rest. You look tired." Ava smiled faintly, closing the sketchbook. "No, Ethan. I'm just finally waking up." She left the room before he could reply. And as the morning sun bled into gold across the skyline, she knew the cracks in their perfect home weren't the end of something. They were the beginning of her way out. The city had begun to bloom again, wisteria curling around lampposts and jacaranda petals painting the sidewalks purple. But inside the Parker penthouse, the air was still cold. Ethan left early every morning and returned later each night, his presence now more ghost than man. Ava didn't mind the distance anymore. It gave her room to breathe. She spent her days quietly, sketching by the window, rediscovering the rhythm of her own hands. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was movement, life, faint but persistent. That Thursday, her phone buzzed again. Lila, you've avoided me long enough. Saturday, Old Fourth Ward Art Festival. I'm picking you up at noon. No excuses. Ava smiled in spite of herself. Lila Torres had always been the kind of friend who loved loudly, half fire, half heart. She'd been there when Ava met Ethan, when she wore that engagement ring like a promise of a fairy tale. And she'd been the only one who said, even then, "Just promise me you won't disappear inside his world." Ava hadn't kept that promise. Maybe it wasn't too late to start again. Saturday arrived warm and golden. Lila's car pulled up outside the building, music spilling from the windows, laughter already filling the air. Ava hesitated before stepping in, smoothing her jeans like a woman testing her courage. When Lila saw her, she grinned. "Look who finally came back to the land of the living." Ava rolled her eyes but couldn't stop smiling. "Don't start." "Oh, I'll start," Lila said, driving off with purpose. "Because you, my friend, have been hiding behind marble walls and designer curtains for far too long." They drove through Midtown, past murals and coffee shops, the pulse of the city growing louder with every block. By the time they reached the festival, Ava could already smell paint and roasted peanuts, hear laughter and music mingling in the open air. The art festival was chaos in color. Tents lined the street, canvases glimmered under the sun. Musicians played in corners while children danced barefoot. The air felt alive. Ava stood still for a moment, letting it wash over her. The smell of acrylic, the rhythm of laughter, the brushstrokes of people simply existing without apology. Lila looped an arm through hers. "See that?" she said. "This is the world you belong in. Not up in that glass castle pretending not to exist." Ava shook her head softly. "It's not that simple, Lila." "It never is," Lila replied, eyes narrowing. "But you used to fight for your life, remember? The girl who painted until dawn because she believed art could change people. Where is she?" Ava looked down, voice barely above a whisper. She got tired of not being enough. Lila's expression softened. No, Ava. You were just surrounded by people too small to see your light. They wandered through the tents, and Ava's steps grew surer. She paused at a booth where a young woman sold handmade journals. On the covers were hand-painted phrases. Begin again. Unfold. Don't apologize for taking up space. Ava traced one of the covers, her throat tightening. The artist behind the table smiled. First one's always for you, she said. People who hesitate the longest usually need it most. Ava blinked back tears. Thank you. Lila watched her friend closely. That's what I'm talking about. The world keeps leaving you messages, and you keep pretending you can't read them. Ava laughed through the ache. You always have to be so poetic. It's not poetry, Lila said, squeezing her shoulder. It's survival. They stopped for lunch at a food truck park nearby, sitting under a canopy of lights. The afternoon sun caught Ava's curls, now free and wild again, and Lila leaned back, studying her with approval. You're starting to look like yourself, she said. Who's that? Ava asked quietly. The woman who paints storms and laughs like thunder. Ava smiled faintly, but her eyes clouded. I don't know if I can be her again, Lila. I've changed. Everything's changed. Lila leaned forward. Good. You're supposed to. You're not supposed to stay small just because someone else is afraid of your power. The words hit deep. Ava turned away, blinking fast. He wouldn't even let me hang my own paintings in our house, she murmured. Said they were too loud, that they didn't fit the aesthetic. Lila snorted. Too loud. Maybe that's exactly what you need to be. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of the crowd swelled around them. Distant laughter, clinking glasses, the hum of music. Life. Then Ava said softly, Last night, I dreamed I was standing on a rooftop, covered in paint. The wind was pulling at me, and I wasn't scared. I was free. Lila smiled, eyes glistening. Then stop dreaming it. Go live it. As the day faded into evening, the festival lights came alive, glowing gold against the darkening sky. A street musician played a violin under a mural of a woman breaking through chains. Ava stopped to watch, and for a fleeting second she saw herself in that painted figure, cracked but unbroken, rising through the wreckage. When Lila finally dropped her off that night, she hugged her tightly. Don't let him make you forget again, she whispered. You are art, Ava. Stop living like a background. Ava stood on the sidewalk long after the car disappeared, the city's pulse still echoing in her chest. She walked upstairs, her sketchbook in hand, and set it open on the kitchen counter where Ethan's briefcase used to sit. Then, with slow, deliberate strokes, she began to paint. Not softly, not neatly, but wildly, fearlessly. Colors bled across the paper like truth she could no longer swallow. And as the city lights flickered against the windows, she realized something that made her smile through tears. She didn't need permission to come back to life. She already had. It began with rain. Atlanta's sky broke open just after sunset, spilling silver onto the city like a confession. The storm beat against the penthouse windows in relentless rhythm. And inside, Ava waited, hands folded, eyes on the door. Ethan was late again. It had been 3 weeks since the art festival. 3 weeks since Ava had started painting again, letting color creep back into her life like breath returning to lungs. She'd been careful, almost secretive about it, but not enough. Last night, Ethan had found the sketches spread across the dining table. Messy, he'd said, his tone clipped. You're bringing chaos into this house. He hadn't seen the irony. Tonight, she expected another version of that same argument, the kind that left her hollow and quiet. But the air felt different, sharp, electric, full of something final. The sound of the elevator doors sliding open sent a chill down her spine. Ethan stepped inside, shaking off his coat, smelling faintly of whiskey and perfume that wasn't hers. He loosened his tie and tossed it carelessly onto the counter. You're home late, Ava said softly. He didn't answer right away, just poured himself a drink. Long day. She nodded toward the glass in his hand. You said that yesterday. He looked up, irritation flashing. What's that supposed to mean? Ava held his gaze. It means I'm tired, Ethan, of pretending not to notice. He smirked. Notice what? The lies, the distance, The way you treat me like a stranger in my own life. He let out a short laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. You really should stop reading those self-help blogs, Ava. They fill your head with nonsense. Is it nonsense to want respect? She asked quietly. He sighed, dismissive. You're overreacting. You always do. Her chest tightened. That word again. Always. The blade he used when he wanted to make her small. She turned away, steadying her voice. Do you even love me anymore? His silence answered before his words did. I don't have time for this. Ava blinked. You don't have time to answer a question about your marriage? He set down his glass too hard, amber spilling over the counter. God, Ava, why do you insist on ruining every quiet night with this drama? Her voice cracked open, raw and trembling. Because quiet is killing me. The words hung in the air, louder than the storm. Ethan froze, startled by the sudden fire in her tone. Ava's eyes glistened, but they were steady. You built a life around silence, she said. You built it so high that I disappeared inside it. And I let you. I let you because I thought love meant staying. But it doesn't. It means seeing. And you stopped seeing me a long time ago. Ethan rubbed his temples, muttering, You're being ridiculous. No, she said, voice rising. I'm being honest. The storm outside roared as lightning flashed, throwing their reflections against the window. For the first time, Ava saw it clearly. Two people standing side by side, yet galaxies apart. Who is she? She asked quietly. He blinked. What? The perfume, the late nights, the way you've stopped saying my name like it means anything. He hesitated a beat too long. Then, coldly, you don't want to know. That was all. Ava exhaled, a single shuddering breath that seemed to carry 5 years of swallowed words. You're right, she said. I don't. She walked to the window, staring out at the rain slicing across the city. You once told me you married me because I made you feel grounded. I think what you meant was obedient. Ethan's voice softened, calculating. Don't do this. You're emotional right now. We can talk tomorrow. Ava turned, tears bright but no longer weak. Tomorrow? There's never a tomorrow with you, just another version of the same silence. She stepped closer, calm and terrifyingly certain. I'm done, Ethan. He blinked, confused. Done with what? With pretending that this is love. She slipped the wedding ring from her finger. For a moment, it caught the lightning's reflection, a brief glint of gold before she set it gently on the counter beside his glass. Ethan stared at it, stunned. You're not serious. Ava's voice was quiet, almost tender. I used to measure my worth by how much of myself I could give you. Now I'm measuring it by how much I'm willing to keep. She turned toward the bedroom. I'll pack in the morning. Ethan's anger finally surfaced. You think you can just walk away? After everything I've done for you? She paused in the doorway. Yes, she said simply, because none of it was for me. The storm outside began to fade, but the silence that followed felt alive. Ava stood by the window one last time, watching the city breathe beneath her. It struck her then. The irony of it all. She had spent years trying to be invisible, and now, at the moment of her leaving, she had never felt more seen. When she finally lay down that night, she didn't cry. Her body trembled with exhaustion, yes, but also with something new, relief. In the distance, thunder rolled like applause for a decision long overdue, and as sleep began to pull her under, Ava whispered into the darkness, not as a plea but as a promise. I'm not afraid anymore. The rain eased to a soft patter against the glass. The storm had passed, but something far stronger had begun. Dawn came quietly, the way freedom often does, not with a shout, but a whisper. When Ava opened her eyes, the city was still half asleep. Pale light spilled through the curtains, washing over the half-packed suitcase on the floor. Her wedding ring was gone from the counter, the space where it had rested now faintly outlined in dust. Ethan had already left for work. His absence filled the room like a ghost that didn't know it was dead. Ava stood by the window, coffee cooling in her hands, watching the world wake up beneath her. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of choice pressing against her chest. Terrifying, liberating, real. She took a breath and whispered to the glass, It's time. The first step out was not cinematic. There was no triumphant music, no perfect lighting, just Ava, dragging her suitcase through the quiet lobby of the high-rise where the doorman avoided eye contact. Her heels clicked against marble, steady, defiant. Outside, the morning air was cool and sharp. Atlanta's skyline stretched before her, vast and indifferent. She hailed a cab, gave the driver an address she hadn't said aloud in years, her old art studio, the one she'd given up when Ethan said, "It's not practical." The ride was silent, except for the hum of traffic and the steady beat of her heart. When she arrived, the small brick building looked exactly as she remembered, worn, stubborn, alive. A "For Lease" sign leaned crookedly in the window, rain-stained and sun-bleached. The key she'd once kept on her old keychain was long gone, but the smell of turpentine and dust lingered like memory itself. Ava pressed her palm against the cold glass. "I'm back," she murmured. By noon, she sat in a downtown cafe, papers spread before her. Across the table was Grace Liu, an attorney recommended by Lila, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice like steel wrapped in silk. Grace had listened without judgment as Ava explained her decision to leave. Now she slid a stack of documents forward. "Divorce isn't just emotional," Grace said softly. "It's financial, legal, strategic. Ethan will try to intimidate you. Don't let him. You have more power than you think." Ava's hands trembled slightly as she signed the first page. The sound of the pen scratching across paper was almost sacred. Grace watched her for a moment, then smiled gently. "You're doing the hardest thing a person can do, Ava. You're starting over. And starting over is a kind of art." Ava looked up, surprised by the words. "Art," she echoed. Grace nodded. "You've been surviving someone else's masterpiece. It's time to paint your own." That night, Ava checked into a modest apartment on the east side of the city. 2 rooms, creaky floors, paint peeling in soft corners. To anyone else, it might have seemed small. To her, it was vast. The walls were blank, waiting. She unpacked only the essentials. Her sketchbook, her brushes, a few clothes, and the courage she'd borrowed from every woman who had ever walked away from the wrong kind of love. Then she stood in the center of the room, barefoot, and laughed, quietly at first, then freely. It wasn't joy exactly. It was release. Days passed like new brushstrokes. Ava began to fill the space with fragments of herself. A half-finished painting by the window. A thrifted chair draped with one of her old scarves. The scent of coffee replacing the sterile air of the penthouse. She started teaching art classes for kids at a community center nearby. The pay was small, but the laughter was priceless. One afternoon, a little girl named Maya held up a canvas splashed with pinks and yellows and said, "It's messy, but I like it." Ava smiled. Messy means you're brave. And for the first time, she realized she was speaking to herself too. Still, nights were hardest. Freedom has a way of echoing in the dark, reminding you what you've lost as much as what you've gained. There were moments when Ava missed the luxury, the certainty, even the illusion of love. But she never missed him. Instead, she missed herself, the self she was still relearning, one heartbeat at a time. One evening, she painted long past midnight, colors spilling across the canvas in furious reds and deep violets. When she stepped back, she saw not pain, but power. A woman standing alone in a storm, her eyes open, her hands steady. Beneath it, she scrawled 3 words, "Still. I rise." Ethan called once, then again. Each time she let the phone ring until it stopped. His voice messages were rehearsed, sweetness dipped in guilt, promises laced with control. "You're making a mistake," he said in one. "I just want to talk," in another. And finally, in anger, "You'll regret this, Ava." She listened only once, then deleted them all. His words no longer had gravity. The woman who once whispered her thoughts now spoke them through color, through brushstrokes that roared louder than apology ever could. One Sunday, Lila visited, bringing cheap wine and loud laughter. They sat on the floor amid canvases and chaos. Lila surveyed the room, then grinned. "This place looks like your soul exploded." Ava laughed. "Good. It was about time." Lila raised her glass. "To beginnings." Ava touched hers gently. "No," she said. "To becoming." That night, as rain began again outside her new window, Ava stood barefoot on the wooden floor, her reflection glimmering faintly against the glass. She thought about the penthouse she'd left behind, The marble, the silence, the prison dressed as perfection. And she realized that she hadn't escaped it. She'd outgrown it. The storm whispered against the city, soft but sure. And somewhere between thunder and dawn, Ava Coleman finally slept, peaceful, unafraid, and free. It was late afternoon when Ava first saw the building. The community center stood at the corner of Auburn Avenue, its red brick walls cracked but proud, like something that had survived every storm and refused to fall. She'd passed it before on her way to the art classes, but today something stopped her. Maybe it was the faded mural on the side, a swirl of faces and colors half washed by time. Maybe it was the way the sun hit the glass, scattering light like broken promises turned into gold. She got out of her car and walked closer. The mural's lower edge was chipped, the colors peeling. She ran her fingers across the paint, feeling the roughness under her skin. It felt familiar, imperfect, alive. "Careful," a voice called from behind her. "That wall's got more history than half this city." She turned. A man stood by the steps, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in worn jeans and a paint-smeared shirt. His hair was streaked with dust and sunlight, his eyes an unexpected gray, steady, observant, the kind of eyes that didn't just look at you, but saw you. "Sorry," she said quickly, stepping back. "I didn't mean to." He smiled, faint but kind. "You're fine. Most people walk right past without noticing it. You're one of the few who stopped." Ava glanced back at the mural. "It's beautiful, even broken. That's why I'm here," he said, nodding toward the tools in his hand. "Trying to bring it back to life." She hesitated. "You're the artist?" He shook his head. "No, the original artist passed away a few years ago. I'm just restoring it. My name's Michael. Michael Rivers." Something about the name settled softly in her chest. Over the next hour they talked. He told her about the mural, how it was painted by a group of local artists 20 years ago to honor the women who'd built the neighborhood during segregation, how time and rain had nearly erased it, how he'd promised to restore it piece by piece before the city sold the building to developers. Ava listened, her heart tugging at every word. When he asked what she did, she almost said nothing, but instead she said, "I paint." The words surprised her as much as him. They felt new and old at the same time, like a name she'd once forgotten. Michael's eyes lit up. "Then you understand what it means to save something with color." She smiled faintly. "I used to." He looked at her, studying her carefully, as if seeing the shadow behind the smile. "Used to?" Ava hesitated. "I stopped painting for a while. I'm learning how to start again." Michael nodded slowly. "That's the hardest part, isn't it? Starting again. People think it's about courage, but really, it's about forgiveness." She frowned. "Forgiveness? Of yourself," he said simply, "for staying too long in the wrong place, for losing time, for forgetting your own voice." The words sank deep, heavy, and true. Ava found herself returning to the mural the next day, and the next. Sometimes she brought coffee, sometimes she brought brushes. They worked in companionable silence, him sketching outlines, her filling in color, the walls slowly transforming under their hands. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was recognition, the quiet, startling kind that happens when two broken things fit together in the light. Michael talked about art like it was breathing. He believed in color the way some people believed in prayer. "Every shade means something," he told her once. "Red for fight, blue for faith, gold for what survives." "And black?" she asked. He smiled. "Black is depth, the color everything else depends on." She thought about that long after he'd gone. One afternoon, a sudden summer rain swept through the city, scattering brushes and canvases. They ran for cover under the narrow awning of the center, both laughing breathlessly. The storm poured around them, drenching the pavement, turning the air electric. For a moment, they just stood there, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his arm. The laughter faded, replaced by something quieter. Michael looked at her, his gaze steady. "You remind me of the mural," he said. Ava blinked. "Faded?" "Resilient," he corrected. "Still standing." The thunder rumbled overhead, but she barely heard it. The sound of his words was louder. When the rain passed, they stepped out again, the air thick with petrichor and possibility. The mural glistened wetly in the sunlight, its colors revived. Ava traced a newly painted line with her fingertip. "It's strange," she murmured. "I thought I'd lost the part of me that cared about beauty." Michael looked at her, eyes soft. "You didn't lose it. You just buried it under someone else's idea of peace." Something in her chest cracked open, a truth she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She turned toward him, wanting to say something, but words failed. Instead, she just smiled. "You talk like a poet," he chuckled. "I talk like a man who's made mistakes and learned what matters." Their eyes met again, and for the briefest second, the world went still. The city noise, the dripping gutters, the distant horns, all of it blurred into quiet. And in that quiet, Ava felt the faintest pulse of something she hadn't dared to feel in a long time. Not love, not yet, but recognition. The kind that says, "You've been through the fire too, haven't you?" When she finally walked away that evening, the city glowed gold in the fading light. Behind her, the mural shimmered against the brick, a mosaic of survival and hope. Ava glanced back once, her heart unsteady but alive. She didn't know where this road would lead, or what it meant that their paths had crossed. But she knew this. Some collisions don't break you, they remake you. And sometimes, the people you meet after the storm aren't there to fix you. They're there to remind you that you were never broken at all. The days that followed were softer, but never still. Atlanta's air grew warmer, the city humming with its usual chaos. Sirens, laughter, rainstorms that came and went without warning. Yet for Ava, everything felt strangely quiet. It wasn't the suffocating silence she once lived inside. It was the kind that comes when you're relearning how to listen to yourself. Each morning, she walked the few blocks to the community center, where the mural had begun to bloom again under sunlight and new paint. Michael was always there before her, brush in hand, the faint trace of music playing from his phone. Sometimes they worked in silence. Sometimes they talked for hours about everything but their pasts. And still, between the strokes of color and the passing of days, Ava felt something shift inside her. The ache in her chest no longer felt like loss. It felt like expansion. One afternoon, she arrived early, finding Michael alone, staring up at the wall. The mural had begun to take shape, faces emerging from swirls of gold and blue, women holding flowers, hands reaching toward each other. He didn't notice her at first. His eyes were distant, his expression heavy. "Something wrong?" she asked softly. He turned, startled, then smiled faintly. "Just thinking about how some art never gets finished, because the people who start it never make it to the end." Ava stepped beside him, following his gaze. "Maybe it's not about finishing," she said. "Maybe it's about leaving something behind that matters." Michael looked at her then, really looked. "You talk like someone who's learning to breathe again." She smiled, small and honest. "Maybe I am." That evening, after the work was done, he walked her home. The sun was low, the sky bruised with pink and amber. They stopped at a small bridge overlooking the train tracks, the city lights flickering like constellations below. Michael leaned on the railing. "You ever notice how people breathe differently when they're scared?" Ava tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "They hold their breath," he said, "waiting for something to happen, waiting to be safe again. But breathing, that's what keeps you alive, not waiting." She stared out at the horizon, her throat tightening. "I think I forgot how to breathe a long time ago." He glanced at her, voice quiet. "Then start here, with me." For a long moment, neither spoke. The city hummed beneath them. The sky deepened, and Ava felt the weight in her chest ease just a little. Weeks passed. Ava painted during the day, taught art to children in the evenings, and filled her nights with color instead of worry. Her apartment began to transform, a sanctuary of half-finished canvases, mismatched vases of wildflowers, laughter echoing from phone calls with Lila. She was no longer surviving. She was creating again. Still, some nights she caught herself reaching for the ghost of a life she'd left behind. Not the man, never him, but the illusion of certainty, the part of her that once believed happiness had to be earned through sacrifice. One night, she stood before her latest painting, an abstract storm of deep blues and silver streaks. She'd called it breathwork. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Every line was a confession, every brushstroke a heartbeat. She stared at it for a long time before whispering, "I'm still here." And for the first time, the words didn't sound like surprise. They sounded like pride. A few days later, Michael invited her to a small art showcase at a local cafe. "It's nothing fancy," he said almost shyly. "Just local artists showing what they've got. You should come. Ava hesitated. Crowds still made her uneasy. Being seen still felt dangerous. But something about the way he said it, the quiet assurance, the belief, made her say yes. That night, the cafe glowed with warm lights and chatter. Paintings lined the walls, music spilled from a corner, and the smell of coffee hung in the air. Ava stood among strangers who spoke her language, color, feeling, story. When Michael introduced her to other artists, he didn't call her Ethan's ex-wife. He said, "This is Ava. She's an incredible painter." And just like that, she was someone again. Not a shadow, not a secret, a name that belonged to her. After the show, they walked together through quiet streets. The air was cool, the moon a pale silver coin above them. Michael broke the silence first. "You know, I used to think rebuilding meant going back to what you lost. But I don't think that's true anymore." Ava looked at him curious. "What changed your mind?" He smiled. "You did." The words caught her off guard, fluttering between fear and warmth. She opened her mouth to respond, but he stopped her with a look. Not demanding, not urgent, just steady. "I'm not asking for anything," he said softly. "I just want you to know that you make things lighter. And maybe that's what art is supposed to do. Maybe that's what people are supposed to do for each other." Ava's eyes glistened. "You make it sound easy." He shook his head. "It's not, but it's worth it." When she got home that night, Ava didn't turn on the lights. She stood by the window, the moon painting her in silver. She thought of the mural, the hands reaching upward, the faces alive with hope. She thought of Michael's quiet steadiness, of Lila's fierce laughter, of Grace's faith, all the people who had become her colors. The city exhaled outside her window, and for once, Ava exhaled with it, slowly, deeply, without fear. She realized then that healing wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a gentle, daily choosing, a decision to stay, to breathe, to live in the space she'd built with her own hands. And for the first time in years, Ava Coleman didn't feel like she was surviving her life. She was living it. It happened on a Tuesday. The sky was clear, the air warm, and Ava was laughing, really laughing, for the first time in what felt like forever. Michael had just told a ridiculous story about one of the kids at the community center, and she was doubled over near the mural, paintbrush in hand, sunlight in her hair. For a fleeting moment, she thought, maybe this is what peace feels like. Then her phone buzzed. The name on the screen made her breath catch. Ethan. Just one word, but it felt like a door she'd sealed shut had begun to rattle from the other side. She didn't answer. She couldn't. But he didn't stop calling. One missed call turned into 3. Then a message appeared. "We need to talk." Her fingers trembled as she stared at it. It had been months since she'd left him. Months of silence that had started to feel sacred. The divorce papers had been filed. Grace had handled everything. He wasn't supposed to have her new number. That night, Ava sat in her apartment, surrounded by paintings that now felt suddenly fragile. The city hummed below her window, but all she could hear was the echo of his voice from memory. Smooth, persuasive, dangerous in its charm. She deleted the message, but ghosts don't fade because you ignore them. They wait. The next morning, she arrived at the cafe near the art district, where she often met Lila. The bell above the door chimed softly as she stepped inside. The smell of roasted coffee grounded her, just for a moment. She ordered her drink, turned toward the window, and froze. Ethan was standing outside. Immaculate suit, perfect posture, the same disarming smile that once made her believe anything he said. For a second, she thought it was a hallucination. But then he lifted his hand in a small, deliberate wave. Ava's pulse roared in her ears. She could have walked away, should have, but she didn't. Some part of her needed to know why he'd come back. She stepped outside, the noise of the city collapsing into a hush. "Ava," he said, his voice soft with practiced regret. "You look good." She studied him, the lines around his eyes, the expensive watch on his wrist. Nothing about him had changed, except the way she saw him. "What do you want, Ethan?" he sighed, slipping his hands into his pockets like a man performing sincerity. "I just wanted to see you. To talk. We ended badly and We ended truthfully," she interrupted. "That's not bad. That's honest." He flinched, just slightly. Then the charm returned. "I've been thinking. About us. About everything that happened. I know I made mistakes. Ava laughed quietly. Mistakes? He frowned. Why are you looking at me like that? Because for years, she said, her voice steady, you trained me to question my own reality. And now I can finally see it for what it was. He blinked, confused. I don't understand. That's the problem, she said. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the world bustling around them. Cars, laughter, the hiss of espresso machines, while something invisible fractured between them. Ethan's smile faltered. You don't have to be cruel, Ava. I came here to make peace. Peace, she echoed. You don't get to redefine the word after you built a war out of my love. Her words hit him, sharp and sure. People were watching now, but Ava didn't care. She wasn't the woman who used to shrink under scrutiny. Ethan's voice dropped lower. You're really different now. I am, she said simply. He tilted his head, studying her as if she were a stranger. Is it because of him? She didn't answer. Ethan smiled bitterly. I knew it. There's always someone waiting to pick up what another man left behind. Ava's expression hardened. Michael didn't find me. I found myself. He just had the decency not to break me again. The edge in her tone made Ethan's face twist, pride curdling into anger. You'll regret this, he said quietly. People always do when they walk away from what's real. Ava stepped closer, her voice calm but fierce. You were never real, Ethan. You were just loud enough to make me forget my own voice, but I remember it now. She turned to leave but then paused, her words final and deliberate. I used to think you broke me, but I was only bending. Now I know how to stand. And with that, she walked away. Inside the cafe, she sat back down, her hands trembling. Lila appeared moments later, breathless. I saw him outside. Are you okay? Ava nodded slowly. Yes, actually yes. Lila studied her face, then smiled. You look lighter. Ava exhaled, the tension uncoiling from her shoulders. Because I finally realized something. What's that? He's not my villain anymore, she said softly. He's just part of the story I outgrew. Lila's eyes glistened. That's the kind of freedom you can't buy. Ava smiled faintly. No, you earn it. That night, she returned to her apartment and picked up a blank canvas. The confrontation still pulsed inside her, but it didn't burn. It illuminated. She dipped her brush into gold paint and began to create. The image that emerged wasn't of Ethan, or even herself. It was of hands breaking chains, not violently, but gracefully, as if release itself were an art form. When she was done, she stepped back and whispered, finally. Outside, the city was quiet, the moon reflected in every window. Ava closed hers, feeling the night air touch her skin. The past had knocked, but she didn't open the door. And for the first time, that felt like victory. The day Ava found the building, the air smelled like rain and paint thinner. It was an old warehouse on Edgewood Avenue, half swallowed by vines and time, its faded sign barely legible. Coleman and Sons Printing Company. The irony made her smile. A place once used to press other people's words onto paper would soon become a space where she could create her own. She stood on the cracked sidewalk, arms crossed, heart racing. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Michael stopped beside her, hands in his pockets, studying the structure. You sure about this? Ava nodded, eyes bright. Completely. He looked at her, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Then I'll help you build it. The next few months became a blur of motion, sawdust, and stubborn hope. They tore down walls, stripped old wallpaper, replaced shattered windows with wide panes of glass that flooded the rooms with sunlight. What was once forgotten began to breathe again. The place transformed slowly, like Ava herself, a restoration of something that had always been beautiful beneath the ruin. When the local news covered her project, they called it the Ember Space, a community gallery for women artists, a place where stories burned bright instead of being buried. Ava laughed at the name at first, but the more she heard it, the more it felt right. Ember, something small that could set the world on fire if you let it. There were nights when exhaustion made her question everything. She'd sit on the cold concrete floor, paint-stained and weary, staring at the unfinished walls. Doubt would creep in like fog, soft, relentless. Who am I to do this? She'd whisper. But Michael always seemed to know when to appear. He'd bring her tea, lean against the wall, and say quietly, "You're someone who refuses to stay small." That's who. And she would smile. Every time. By spring, the transformation was nearly complete. White walls glowed under warm lights. Canvases hung in neat symmetry, and laughter from volunteers filled the rooms. It wasn't perfection, it was life. Ava stood in the center of it one afternoon, watching the sunlight dance across the polished floors. Lila was there too, helping arrange flowers for the opening night. "Do you realize what you've done?" Lila said, shaking her head in awe. "You didn't just rebuild your life, Ava. You built a home for every woman who's ever been told she couldn't." Ava smiled softly. "It feels strange, like standing inside a dream I didn't think I deserved." "Then get used to it," Lila said, winking, "because you earned it." When opening night arrived, the city showed up. Artists, neighbors, journalists, even a few faces Ava hadn't seen in years. The ember space glowed with warmth and music, people wandering from painting to painting, wine glasses in hand, voices rising in laughter. Ava moved through the crowd slowly, every breath a prayer of gratitude. She caught sight of Michael across the room, talking to one of the younger artists. His sleeves were rolled up, his hands still faintly stained with paint, his smile easy. He didn't stand beside her to claim her success. He stood among everyone, proud just to have been part of it. And that, she realized, was what love should feel like. Not ownership, not rescue, just belief. Midway through the evening, a woman approached Ava, a stranger with tears in her eyes. "Your story," the woman said softly. "I read about it in the paper. I left someone too. I thought I'd never find myself again. But then I saw your gallery. I thought, maybe I could start over too." Ava's throat tightened. She reached for the woman's hand. "You already have," she said. The woman smiled through her tears, and Ava felt something inside her settle, a quiet knowing that this was exactly what she was meant to do. Later that night, when the lights dimmed and the crowd thinned, Ava stepped outside for air. The city hummed around her, vibrant and alive. Michael followed a few steps behind, standing beside her on the curb. "You did it," he said softly. She exhaled, the cool night air brushing her skin. "We did it." He shook his head. "No, you did. You built something out of ashes." Ava turned to him, eyes glistening. "It wasn't the ashes that scared me," she said. "It was the silence after. I didn't know who I was without the noise. But now, I do." He smiled, that quiet, knowing smile she'd come to trust. "Then the world better be ready." She laughed, resting her hands in her coat pockets. "The world can wait. I'm finally not chasing it anymore." When they walked back inside, the last guests were leaving. A single painting hung in the corner, the one Ava had painted after Ethan's final phone call. The golden chains breaking open, light pouring through. Someone had placed a small card beneath it that read, "Freedom is the most expensive art form, but the one worth paying for." Ava didn't remember writing it, but maybe she didn't need to. Maybe some truths write themselves when you've lived them deeply enough. As the night ended, she turned off the final light. The gallery stood quiet, glowing faintly under the moon that spilled through the windows. Ava lingered for a moment, her reflection caught in the glass, no longer a ghost, no longer someone else's silence. She smiled softly to herself and whispered, "Welcome home." And for once, it didn't feel like the end of something. It felt like the beginning of everything. Summer settled over Atlanta like a sigh. Thick, golden, endless. The ember space had become everything Ava dreamed of. Art shows every Friday, children's classes on weekends, laughter echoing through hallways that once held dust and silence. For the first time, her life moved with rhythm instead of routine. And yet, beneath the calm, something restless stirred. It wasn't doubt, exactly. It was longing, the kind that blooms only after the storm has passed. The ache not for what was lost, but for what still might be found. Michael was there, always. Not hovering, not claiming, just present. He'd drop by with supplies or coffee, fix a crooked frame, or stay late helping her clean up after events. They shared a kind of quiet intimacy, built not from declarations but from shared stillness. Sometimes he'd look at her as if she was a song he almost remembered, and sometimes she caught herself wishing he'd never stop. One late evening, the gallery was nearly empty. The hum of the city outside had softened to a low, steady pulse. Ava stood by a newly installed mural, a phoenix rising from crimson smoke, wings outstretched, fire blooming at its heart. Michael approached, hands in his pockets. "It's finished," he said softly. Ava smiled. "I'm not sure art is ever finished. You just reach a point where it stops asking for more." He looked at the mural, then at her. "It looks alive." "Maybe it is," she said. "It's everything I couldn't say out loud." Michael nodded, his gaze lingering on her face. "Funny," he murmured. "I think it's saying everything I've been afraid to." The air between them shifted, subtle but undeniable. The kind of silence that hums with too many unspoken things. They sat together afterward, on the gallery floor, the scent of paint still heavy in the air. Ava leaned back against the wall, exhaustion and contentment mingling. "You ever think," Michael said, "that some people meet too early, before they're ready to be good to each other?" Ava glanced at him. "Or too late, after they've already been broken?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe it's not about timing. Maybe it's about courage." She looked down, her fingers tracing a streak of dried gold paint on her jeans. "I had courage once. I used it all just to leave." "Leaving isn't the end of courage," he said gently. "It's where it begins." She met his eyes then, and the world seemed to still around them. The kind of stillness that makes everything louder. The heartbeat, the breath, the feeling that something was about to change. The following week blurred by in color and chaos. Preparations for the next showcase, endless phone calls, local press interviews. Ava barely slept, but every time Michael stopped by, the noise faded. They worked side by side, their conversations light but layered, filled with laughter that carried undercurrents of something deeper. And yet, Ava hesitated. She'd built her independence with blood and fire. The idea of letting someone close again terrified her. Love, to her, had once meant surrender. She wasn't ready to hand herself over again, not even to someone who made her feel seen. But fate, as always, had its own timing. On the night before the new exhibit's launch, a summer storm rolled in. Power flickered, thunder rattled the windows, but Ava refused to cancel. The storm outside felt like an echo of her heart, wild, relentless, beautiful. She was setting up the last display when Michael appeared in the doorway, soaked from rain, holding a box of candles. "Figured you might need these if the lights go," he said. She laughed, taking them from him. "You think of everything." "Not everything," he said quietly. The thunder rolled again, closer now. A streak of lightning illuminated his face, soft, steady, waiting. Ava looked at him, her hands trembling slightly. "You don't have to stay." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm here." Something inside her cracked open. She took a step closer. The storm raged outside, but neither of them flinched. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "So am I," he admitted. And then, without fanfare, without permission, he kissed her. It wasn't the kind of kiss that begged or promised. It was one that understood. The kind that said, "I know where you've been, and I'm not here to cage you. I'm here to stand beside you while you fly." The storm roared, the gallery lights flickered, and the fire in her chest reignited. Brighter, cleaner, real. When they finally pulled apart, the room glowed only by candlelight. Ava's breath trembled between laughter and awe. Michael brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You don't have to protect yourself from me," he said softly. She smiled, eyes wet but certain. "I'm not protecting myself from you, Michael. I'm protecting what I'm becoming." He nodded slowly. "Then let me protect that with you." And in that moment, she understood. Love didn't have to mean losing yourself. Sometimes it meant being found in your wholeness. The next morning, when the sun broke through the storm clouds, the city was washed clean. The ember space gleamed again, unscathed. Ava stood before the mural, the phoenix glowing in the light, and whispered, "You burned, and you rose. So did I." Behind her, Michael slipped his hand into hers. No grand words, no promises, just warmth. And as the morning light poured through the windows, Ava realized something profound. The fire that had once destroyed her now lived within her. Not wild and dangerous, but steady, guiding, alive. The evening shimmered with anticipation. The ember space was bathed in golden light, the hum of conversation floating through the air like music. It was the gallery's one-year anniversary, a celebration of survival, creation, and everything Ava had rebuilt from the wreckage of her old life. Guests moved between canvases, wine glasses in hand, laughter echoing beneath the high ceilings. Photographers snapped photos for the Atlanta Journal. Influencers posted videos beneath the mural of the phoenix that had become the gallery's symbol. Ava stood near the entrance, radiant in an ivory suit that gleamed softly against her skin. Confidence no longer looked borrowed on her. It fit like it had always belonged. Michael hovered nearby, giving her space, but his eyes followed her like quiet assurance. Everything was perfect, until it wasn't. It started with a whisper. Someone near the bar murmured her name, a tone laced with curiosity. Ava turned, and the air shifted. Ethan Parker had arrived. He stood in the doorway, immaculate as ever, charm lacquered across his face like a polished lie. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing tension before understanding it. His gaze swept the room, then landed on her. Ava's stomach tightened, but she didn't move. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, the day the past would try to reclaim its place in her story. Not tonight, she thought, not here. He approached slowly, his smile practiced, his voice a low purr meant for an audience. Ava, you look extraordinary. She met his gaze without blinking. You shouldn't be here. I came to see what you've made. His eyes drifted across the gallery walls, lingering on the mural of the phoenix. Impressive. You always had taste. Careful, she said evenly. It almost sounds like respect. He chuckled softly, ignoring the jab. The papers say you built this from nothing. I suppose I should congratulate you. You should, she said, but we both know I didn't start from nothing. I started from what you left me with. Ashes. The words drew murmurs from nearby guests. Ethan's smile faltered. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. You didn't have to make me the villain in your story, Ava. Her voice was calm, but every syllable cut clean. You wrote your part all by yourself. You think you're better than me now? He hissed, the mask slipping just slightly. She tilted her head. No, just freer. The quiet surrounding them thickened, attention turning toward the exchange. Ava could feel eyes on her, but for once, she didn't shrink beneath them. Ethan straightened, reclaiming his composure. You'll realize someday that this, he gestured around the room, is built on spite. It won't last. Ava smiled, serene and unshaken. Actually, it's built on something stronger. Truth. The murmurs grew. A few guests stepped closer. Michael moved forward instinctively, but Ava gave a subtle shake of her head. She didn't need rescuing. She took a step toward Ethan, her voice carrying through the space with quiet authority. You know, for years I thought, if I could just make you proud, I'd finally be enough. I painted myself smaller, quieter, dimmer, just so you could shine. But now I understand something. She paused, the room holding its breath. I was never too much. You were just not enough to handle me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ethan's jaw tightened. You always did love a performance. Ava's eyes glimmered, not with tears, but with conviction. No, Ethan. I used to perform love. Now I live it. She turned her back to him then, walking toward the center of the gallery where her newest painting hung. It was a self-portrait, abstract, powerful. A woman standing inside a storm of color, her silhouette ablaze but unconsumed. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "To the woman I became when no one was watching." The crowd gathered around it, drawn in by the gravity of the moment. Ethan lingered near the edge, his reflection caught in the glass of her artwork, fading, small, irrelevant. Michael stepped quietly beside Ava, his presence grounding her. You handled that beautifully, he murmured. She exhaled slowly. I didn't handle it. I just stopped hiding. He smiled softly. Same thing. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the laughter had faded into memory, Ava stood alone in the gallery. The soft hum of the city seeped through the windows, mixing with the faint scent of paint and candle wax. She thought about the girl she once was, the woman who flinched under whispers, who apologized for taking up space. She thought about how that version of her would never have believed this moment could exist. The reckoning hadn't been about Ethan at all. It had been about standing in her own light and refusing to step aside ever again. She turned off the final light, the mural of the phoenix glowing faintly in the dark. The word ember, carved above the entrance, caught the glow, alive, defiant. Outside, the night air was cool, sweet with summer rain. Michael waited by the door, his hands in his pockets, a quiet smile on his face. Ready to go? he asked. Ava looked back once more at the gallery, her sanctuary, her victory, her voice, and nodded. Yes, she said softly. It's time to live the part after the ending. He reached for her hand, and together they stepped into the night. The fire behind them didn't fade. It followed, steady and bright, the kind that doesn't destroy anymore. It illuminated. Autumn slipped quietly into Atlanta. The heat softened, the air grew tender, and leaves spun through the streets like pages turning themselves. Ava had always loved this time of year, the season of change, of endings that looked like beginnings. At the Ember Space, sunlight filtered through the high windows in amber ribbons. The gallery felt different now, softer, warmer. Every painting hummed with life. Every wall whispered her story back to her. But not as a wound, this time, as wisdom. Michael was there more often than not, fixing light fixtures, building new displays, humming under his breath while he worked. He never announced his presence. He simply fit, a steady rhythm inside her newly balanced world. And though neither of them had defined what they were, their connection was undeniable, threaded between quiet moments and the space between words. One evening, Ava found him in the main room, staring at her self-portrait, the one from the anniversary night. The light caught the brushstrokes, so it almost seemed to move, the figure inside it alive and breathing. "You know," he said softly, "it's wild to see you through your own eyes." She smiled. "What do you mean?" "You paint yourself like someone who's still fighting. But when I look at you now, I don't see the fight. I see peace." Ava's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm still learning how to believe in peace." Michael turned toward her. "Maybe peace isn't something you believe in. Maybe it's something you practice." The simplicity of his words undid her. He reached out, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Ava. You're allowed to rest." She looked up at him, heart tight in her chest. "Rest feels like surrender." "It's not," he said. "It's trust." They didn't kiss that night. They didn't need to. Something deeper was happening, an understanding, a quiet merging of two people who had stopped running from their own reflections. But love, real love, never arrives without fear. Later that week, Ava woke from a dream, one where she was back in the penthouse, locked behind glass walls. Ethan's voice echoed faintly, telling her to smile more. When she jolted awake, her heart was pounding, her palms damp. She sat in the dark trying to steady her breath. Then she felt the gentle vibration of her phone. A message from Michael. "I can't sleep. Meet me at the gallery?" She didn't reply, just got up, pulled on a sweater, and drove through the sleeping city. The gallery was dark except for the golden glow spilling from the windows. Inside, Michael was sitting on the floor, sketches spread around him. When he looked up, his smile was small but real. "Couldn't stop drawing," he said. "Sometimes it's the only way I can breathe." Ava sat beside him, their shoulders brushing. "Funny, that's how I feel when I paint." They sat in silence for a long time, the kind that felt holy. Then, softly, Ava said, "I don't know how to love without losing myself. Every time I've tried before, I disappeared." Michael turned to her. "Then don't disappear this time. Stay exactly who you are. If it's love, it'll make space for that." She looked at him, really looked. The kindness in his eyes, the patience that asked for nothing. It terrified her how much she wanted to believe him. He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. "You don't owe me forever," he said quietly. "Just honesty. That's enough." Tears stung her eyes. "I can give you that." They began to move through the days as if sharing a secret rhythm. Morning coffee runs turned into quiet breakfasts. Afternoons at the gallery became evenings filled with laughter and paint-stained hands. And when he kissed her again, under the golden light of the mural, it wasn't like falling. It was like coming home. No cages, no conditions, no pretending. Just two souls standing side by side, breathing the same air, holding the same truth. Love didn't have to hurt to be real. One night, while they cleaned up after a class, a thunderstorm rolled through the city. Rain tapped softly against the glass, and Ava turned to Michael, eyes thoughtful. "Do you think love can stay gentle?" she asked. He smiled. "Only if you let it." She nodded slowly, then whispered, "Then I'll try." He touched her chin lightly. You already are. Outside, lightning flashed across the skyline, and for a second the entire gallery lit up. Every painting, every color, every memory. It felt as if the universe itself was applauding. Weeks passed. Their love grew not in leaps, but in layers. Steady, rooted, real. They painted together, argued playfully about color palettes, shared quiet dinners with wine and stories of their pasts. One afternoon, Ava found him fixing a cracked window in the studio. She leaned against the doorway, smiling. "You really can't sit still, can you?" He grinned. "I like fixing things." She walked closer, slipping her arms around him from behind. "Not everything broken needs fixing, you know." He turned, resting his forehead against hers. "I know. Some things just need to be loved right." That night, as they locked up the gallery, the mural of the phoenix gleamed faintly behind them, its golden feathers catching the streetlight. Ava looked at it, then at Michael. "It used to be just a painting," she said. "Now it's a mirror." He smiled softly. "Then I guess you finally became the fire." She laughed, low and full of life. "No," she whispered. "I became the light." And in that single, quiet moment, surrounded by the city that had watched her break and rise again, Ava Coleman understood what she had been searching for all along. Not rescue, not redemption, but love without chains. The kind that doesn't ask her to shrink or to shine, but simply to be. The storm came without warning. It was late evening when the first flash split the horizon, an electric thread of white cutting through the Atlanta sky. Ava had just finished locking up the ember space, the soft hum of the city fading behind her. The smell of rain was heavy, metallic, almost sweet. Michael was still inside, sorting supplies for the upcoming youth art program. She called out to him, laughter in her voice. "If we don't leave now, we'll be swimming home." But then came the thunder, deep, relentless, the kind that vibrated through bone. Moments later, the power cut out. The gallery fell into darkness. Ava fumbled for her phone, the faint light trembling across the floor. "Michael?" "Here," his voice answered, calm but distant. "The storm hit a transformer. Everything's out." She found him near the storage room, rain starting to lash against the tall windows. The wind howled outside, shaking the glass. Ava's heart beat faster, not from fear of the storm, but from the feeling she couldn't name. A strange tightening in the air, like something bigger than weather was about to break. Michael moved toward the main doors, checking the locks. "We'll wait it out," he said. "It'll pass." But it didn't. The storm grew wilder. Lightning flashed so bright it painted the room in violent bursts of white. Somewhere nearby, a transformer exploded, followed by a sound Ava would never forget. Glass shattering. One of the upper windows had burst inward. Rain poured through the opening, soaking the floor, splashing onto the paintings along the north wall. "No, no, no, no!" Ava gasped, running forward. She tried to move the canvases, her hands slipping against the wet frames. Water streaked down her arms like tears. Michael joined her, pulling down one of the larger pieces before it could fall. "We'll save what we can," he shouted over the thunder. But the mural, the phoenix, her symbol, her resurrection, was directly beneath the broken window. The rain streaked across it, running like blood down the painted wings. Ava froze, staring. It felt like watching a part of herself drown. "Michael," her voice broke, "the mural." He looked at her, soaked, breathless. "It's just paint, Ava." "No," she whispered. "It's me." For a moment, time dissolved. All she could hear was the rain hammering the roof, the hiss of wind through the broken glass, the sound of her own heartbeat pounding like a drum. Then something inside her snapped. Ava grabbed a bucket, a mop, anything she could find. She worked frantically, her movements desperate, furious, alive. Water splashed across her legs, her arms ached, her hair plastered to her face, but she didn't stop. Michael tried to pull her away, but she shook her head, crying and laughing at the same time. "I can't lose this. Not again." He stepped back, watching her, not helpless, not pitying, just there. Finally, when exhaustion won, she sank to the floor, her palms pressed against the wet concrete. The mural was half ruined, colors bleeding together, the phoenix's wings blurred into chaos. Michael knelt beside her, his voice quiet. "Hey, look." Ava lifted her eyes. In the center of the wall, The gold paint still shimmered. Despite the rain, despite everything, the heart of the phoenix still glowed. "See," he said softly, "it's still burning." Something shifted then, not in the room, but in her. All her life, Ava had been fighting storms. First Ethan's cruelty, then her own fear, then the ghosts of who she used to be. And now, as the rain poured around her, she realized that maybe storms weren't meant to be fought. Maybe they were meant to wash you clean. She leaned her head against Michael's shoulder, her breath trembling. "I thought I'd lost everything again." He shook his head. "No, you just found what can't be destroyed." By morning, the storm had passed. The city smelled like rebirth. Wet earth, blooming magnolia, ozone. The power returned, sunlight flooding through the damaged windows. Ava walked barefoot across the gallery floor. The mural looked different now. The rain had erased some of it, yes, but what remained was hauntingly beautiful. A blend of colors that felt alive, unfinished, honest. She touched the wall, her fingers tracing the golden streaks that refused to fade. "You survived," she whispered. Michael appeared behind her, coffee in hand. "So did you." Ava turned, smiling faintly. "I think I needed this." "The storm?" "The reminder," she said, "that I'm not fragile anymore." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes soft with pride. "You never were." Over the next days, they repaired what they could. Volunteers came, artists offered help, and soon the ember space began to heal. But Ava made one bold decision. She wouldn't restore the mural completely. Instead, she left the watermarks, the scars, the places where the storm had touched it. When people asked why, she simply said, "Because beauty isn't in perfection. It's in endurance." The mural became even more powerful than before. Visitors would stop, stare, and whisper that they'd never seen anything like it. A phoenix reborn through damage, shining brighter because of it. One evening, when the gallery was quiet again, Michael stood beside her as they looked up at the mural. The golden heart gleamed beneath the light, defiant and alive. He reached for her hand. "So, what now?" Ava smiled, her eyes reflecting the golden glow. "Now," she said softly, "now I let the world see me as I am. Cracked, mended, unfinished, but burning still." Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Not a threat, not a warning, just a memory. Ava looked toward it and whispered, almost to herself, "Let it come." I know how to dance in the storm now. And for the first time, she didn't mean survival. She meant joy. The gallery was quiet again. Not the silence of loss this time, but the stillness that follows creation. The kind of calm that hums with life beneath it, waiting to bloom again. Sunlight streamed through the repaired windows, dancing across the gold veins of the mural. The phoenix reborn, more radiant for having been broken. Dust motes floated in the air like slow-falling stars. Ava stood alone in the center of the ember space, barefoot, her reflection mirrored faintly in the polished floor. Around her, the paintings told a story, the same story she had once been afraid to live. Every color on those walls had come from something she thought would destroy her. But now, she understood. Destruction had never been her ending. It had been her teacher. A gentle knock echoed from the doorway. Michael leaned against the frame, his usual grin softened by something deeper, admiration, maybe even awe. "You've been staring at that mural for half an hour," he said. Ava smiled without turning. "I'm not staring, I'm remembering." He stepped closer. "Remembering what?" "That once, I thought this fire would kill me." She turned, her eyes shining in the soft morning light. "But it just burned away everything that wasn't me." Michael didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He walked up beside her, their shoulders brushing, two people standing not in triumph, but in peace. A few weeks later, Ava's story reached farther than she could have imagined. A local journalist's feature about her journey had gone viral. From silence to ember, how one woman painted her way out of darkness. Messages poured in from around the world. Women from different cities, different lives, all writing the same thing in different words. "You gave me courage. I left too. Your fire reminded me of mine." Ava read every single one, her heart swelling with something she hadn't expected. Responsibility. She had built this place for herself, but maybe it was never meant to belong to just her. So she expanded the program, opened studios for survivors of domestic violence, free art therapy sessions, exhibitions for women who had been told their pain was too heavy to be beautiful. The Ember space became more than a gallery. It became a refuge, a revolution. One evening, after a long day of setting up a new exhibition, Ava sat outside on the gallery steps. The city buzzed softly around her, the hum of traffic, the laughter from a nearby cafe, the low whistle of a passing train. Michael joined her, handing her a cup of coffee. "You've built an empire of light," he said quietly. Ava laughed. "No, just a place where people can remember theirs." He studied her for a moment, then asked, "So what's next, Ava Coleman?" She looked out at the city, the skyline glowing like embers in the dark, and smiled. "Maybe it's not about what's next," she said. "Maybe it's about who I keep becoming." He nodded, and they sat together, watching the lights flicker like constellations made of second chances. As night deepened, Ava walked back into the gallery one last time. The mural loomed before her, gold catching the glow of the streetlights. She touched the wall gently, her fingertips brushing the dried paint. It was imperfect, scarred, and utterly alive. In that moment, Ava realized something she had never dared to believe before. That healing isn't about returning to who you were. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be. She whispered to the phoenix on the wall, "Thank you for burning." Then she turned off the lights. Outside, the city breathed. The world would keep spinning. Storms would still come. Hearts would still break. But there would always be people like Ava, people who refused to let the ashes define them. Because somewhere, in every ruined thing, there is a light waiting to be found. And sometimes, it only takes one voice, one story, one act of courage to remind the rest of us that we can rise too. So if you're listening to this now, if you've ever felt trapped in a life that dimmed your fire, if you've ever been told you're too much, too loud, too broken, remember Ava. Remember that even the darkest night ends with a spark, that you can rebuild, repaint, restart, and still be whole. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy of peace. You just have to be brave enough to begin. And when you're ready, share this story. Let someone else see the light beneath your ashes, because that's how fires spread, not through destruction, but through hope.